Welcome to this explainer. It's so easy to get caught up in the romanticized myths of kings, knights, and those grand sweeping battles. But today, we're going to look past all that. We're going to reveal the everyday people who literally built the pre-industrial world from the ground up. We are exploring the gritty, unfiltered life of the medieval blacksmith, a life truly defined by blood, iron, and the price of power. Imagine for a second that we're stepping right into a bustling medieval village. Long before you even see the forge, you hear it, right? The deafening, relentless, rhythmic crash of a massive hammer against iron. And as you get closer, you're hit by this absolute wall of blistering heat. You catch the acrid smell of sulfur and those choking thick clouds of burning coal. This single, exceptionally brutal trade formed the physical infrastructure of everyday life. Agricultural, domestic, military, you name it. They weren't just in the back making fancy swords. These artisans made civilization itself possible. Section 1. The Heart of the Forge. The Thermodynamics of the Smithy. Okay, let's dive into this. The blacksmith's workspace was definitely not just some random room with a fire in the corner. It was a highly calculated, thermodynamic architecture centered around something we call the golden triangle. First, you've got the hearth, the energetic core, usually built of solid brick or stone to block out drafts. Then you have the anvil, which is your kinetic workspace. And finally, the post vise, absolutely essential for securing that hot metal for rapid bending or twisting. Now, the spatial efficiency here was paramount. Every single one of these components was deliberately placed within 1 to 2 paces of each other. Why? Well, heated iron cools off incredibly fast in the open air, so minimizing the actual physical steps between the fire and the striking surface was critical. It conserved heat, and just as importantly, it reduced the sheer, crushing physical fatigue on the smith's body. And this brilliantly illustrates a really common modern misconception we have about the anvil. When you picture one, you're probably imagining that classic London pattern anvil from modern cartoons or movies. You know, the one with the gracefully curved horn and those specific holes for tools. But the reality of medieval industry was completely different. Medieval anvils were much simpler. We're talking about solid rectangular blocks of wrought iron with a steel face, and they were spiked directly into a massive hardwood log that was buried deep down in the dirt floor. This stump design was an absolute necessity to absorb the immense kinetic shock of those heavy, continuous blows. It was raw, it was incredibly functional, and historically accurate, literally the true engine of the medieval forge. Section 2. Blood, Sweat, and Smoke. A day in the life of a medieval smith. The workday began in absolute pitch darkness. Right around 5 in the morning, the apprentice, who was often just a teenage boy sleeping right there in the soot and dirt of the forge, would wake up to haul freezing water, chop wood, and kindle the fire. By 6 a.m., the master and the journeyman arrived, and the heaviest, most exhausting bulk forging began right then in the cool morning air. By noon, the immense thermal and physical stress simply forced a halt. They retreat to rest in the shade, maybe under some chestnut trees, consuming a massive amount of calories. We're talking thick, heavy porridge and coarse rye bread, and they washed it all down with gallons of small beer. Now, because public water was frequently contaminated back then, this low-alcohol brewed beer was actually the safest possible way to stay hydrated and keep working without getting sick. The entire day was strictly divided by human energy levels. That morning shift was entirely dedicated to heavy bulk forging. It required the full kinetic force of the striking team working in perfect unison before the midday heat just became totally unbearable. But the afternoon? The afternoon shifted gears entirely. This was the time for precision fabrication. We're looking at the rapid, highly specialized production of high-demand utility hardware, performing domestic repairs and doing precise assembly work. It really demonstrates this highly specialized vision of labor, as well as a deep, practical understanding of human endurance constraints. This specialized rhythm dictated their most common tasks. Let's look at the forging of a simple iron nail. It's a very precise rhythm. Step 1, heat the iron rod in the forge until it glows bright and becomes malleable. Step 2, rapidly hammer one end to a sharp point right on the anvil. Step 3, cut the rod to the exact length using a hardy hot cut chisel. They would repeat this exact sequence thousands upon thousands of times. The reality is, blacksmiths spent far more time forging essential everyday hardware like nails, S-hooks, and hinges than they ever did crafting those legendary mythical swords. Now, behind the somewhat bizarre myths of the era lay a wealth of accumulated empirical chemistry. Consider the science of quenching, which is the rapid cooling of hot metal. You might have heard legends of quenching blades in the urine of a red-headed boy or a pregnant cow. Sounds wild, right? But look at the underlying science here. The salt content fundamentally alters the cooling rate of iron. Fresh tap water cools the metal extremely fast. Natural seawater is highly accelerated. Urine, which sits at about 2% salt, offers a much more moderate cooling rate, while blood is even slower. They obviously didn't understand molecular chemistry, but they knew exactly what fluids provided the perfect balance of hardness and flexibility for different types of tools. Section 3. Masters of the Guild, Power, Monopolies, and Civic Life. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is seeing how a medieval craftsman's entire existence was defined by an incredibly rigid social structure. You started at the very bottom as an apprentice. This was usually a young boy working entirely unpaid just for room and board for up to a decade. If you actually survived that, you became a journeyman, a skilled laborer earning a strictly regulated daily wage. To reach the very top as a master, you had to pass a grueling masterpiece test and have the substantial wealth required to actually own a shop. Once you were a master, you held true civic authority and a powerful economic monopoly. There was virtually no flexibility here at all. Your rank strictly dictated your life. And to understand just how elite these masters could become, consider this single number, 12. Under the laws of the Carolingian Empire, 12 solidae was the staggering legal value of a single high-quality iron breastplate. This effectively meant the blacksmith's work was functioning as a high-denomination currency. It was literally used to satisfy legal debts and settle criminal liabilities. That is an immense level of social and economic power. This immense power was concentrated in the craft guild. Now, the guild functioned not just as a regulatory cartel, but as a total way of life. They held an absolute economic monopoly over all trade in their town. They strictly enforced quality control, meaning inspectors would literally confiscate substandard work and financially ruin or ban masters. They even regulated fire safety, making it completely illegal to work after dark to prevent horrific citywide infernos. They fixed prices so no one could undercut competitors. But on the flip side, they also provided vital social welfare. They maintained collective funds to support injured members, provided for widows, and even paid for elaborate funerals. It was a complete, highly controlled socioeconomic safety net. But seeing all that, we really must ask, what was the true physical cost of this immense civic power and wealth? Because to achieve this level of prestige, the human body was essentially treated as an expendable resource. Section 4. The True Price of Iron, the Occupational Hazards of the Forge. Let's start with the sheer mechanical toll on the human skeleton, a condition known historically as smith's cramp. I want you to imagine standing on a hard, unforgiving stone floor for up to 16 hours a single day. Now couple that with the violent, asymmetrical weight of swinging heavy hammers repeatedly against solid iron. Over the course of a lifetime, this caused catastrophic musculoskeletal damage. It completely ravaged their bodies with chronic knee, hip, and severe lower back degeneration. By the time they reached middle age, many of these men were just physically broken. So the crucial point to understand here is that the interior of a medieval forge was essentially a dense soup of lethal particulates. Burning that sulfur-rich coal released massive amounts of carbon monoxide and sulfur dioxide, leading to chronic dizziness and, in some cases, fatal asphyxiation. Forging alloys like bronze released zinc oxide fumes, causing a terrifying, debilitating condition called metal fume fever, which permanently scarred the lungs. On top of all that, years of staring into the glaring heat caused thermal blindness. And we can't forget the constant, terrifying risk of blinding accidents from flying metal shrapnel and sudden splashes of molten lead. This widespread suffering actually did not go unnoticed, and it sparked the very beginnings of occupational medicine. In 1473, a physician named Ulrich Ellenbogen published a pioneering treatise titled On the Poisonous Wicked Fumes and Smokes. It's incredible because it proves that the devastating health impacts of the metal trades were well recognized even back in the late medieval period. Yet, due to the intense, unyielding economic pressures of the guild system, these warnings were often just ignored. The forge always demanded its toll. These everyday artisans forged the literal physical foundations of the modern world, using their own bodies as the primary machinery. But it really makes you wonder, how differently did they understand the meaning of a good life or a successful life, when in the face of such profound daily physical sacrifice, survival itself was their ultimate masterpiece? The next time you happen to see an ancient iron nail in a museum, or a piece of medieval armor, take a second to remember the extraordinary human resilience it took to strike that metal.